Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Altecnic presentation, where today we're going to talk about some form of bacterial control through thermal disinfection. Just a little bit of housekeeping. My colleague Sean is on the line with me, and he will be answering any questions. So we'll try and leave some time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. Just so you know, a little bit of background about myself. So I'm technical manager for Altecnic. Altecnic as a company, we are part of the wider Clefty Group, and we are predominantly a valve manufacturer. And we make valves, anything from thermostatic mixing valves, which we'll look at today, pressure reducing valves, radiator valves, etc. Anything in the hydronic market is where we sit as a manufacturer and supplier. So like I say, we're going to look at a bit of bacterial control through thermal disinfection. We'll start to make our way through the slides. Like I say, if you do have any questions, please just ask at the end, and I'll do my best to answer those questions for you. So, key touch points we're going to look at today. So we're going to look at some buildings and the water systems that sit within them, the different types of buildings, different makeup of buildings, how that can have effects on the water systems. Importantly, the bacterial growth of the water systems, how we can overcome that bacterial growth using what we call thermal disinfection with the use of TMVs, and a bit of a conclusion at the end of it. I'll try and keep it sort of as free flowing as we can, and not try and get too much into the real deep details, so we can all follow along as best we can, no matter what market sector we come from. So first of all, we'll have a quick look at the buildings and the water systems that sit within them. So essentially, water systems, they are living, breathing systems. They are living organisms. Now, we have uses for hot and cold water systems within different types of buildings or within the buildings that we use. And those are used for a variety of different things. So they're used for drinking water. We use them obviously for hot and cold water outlets, heating and cooling systems, washing facilities, and food preparation. They're sort of the main points where water systems are used within buildings. There are various types, different sorts, whether we're using booster sets, whether we use stored water, whether we're using hydraulic separation or plate heat exchangers. There are all certain different ways that water systems are used within buildings. Now, the building type can have an impact on the water system, and we'll try and have a look at that now. So the building type, the type of building, if it can be designed or intended use, can be varied implications on how the water system contained within them will react. Now, newer buildings will generally have taken the water systems into account, if that be by pipework design and layout, insulated pipework, and also the pipework materials. So what we mean by that, as buildings have moved on, as we build more buildings nowadays, the whole water system is taken into account when it's designed. Obviously, there's different legislation around these days as what there was historically. But the water systems are definitely taken into account when we design the buildings and pipework material. I think there's so much selection now on pipework material that there's a wider array of things that we can use now when it comes to the systems. Now, older buildings, on the other hand, will vary in many different ways, and this can be from pipework layout, meaning hot and cold services running in close proximity, dead legs from redundant outlets, and complete closures of areas or extensions added without updating the water system. And pipework materials could also impact on the systems, as older installs tend to use, the lead pipes or similar. So there is a lot of, sort of difference in historical installations, shall we say, as opposed to the more, the more modern ways. But look, take a look at the two pictures here. We can see an older design system. The pipework, as we can see, has suffered sort of external corrosion and it's not reaged particularly well. There's no insulation on there, so there could be hot and cold services running close to each other there. So you're going to sort of get transition heat loss and heat gain, which obviously has an impact on the on the bacterial growth in the system, alongside any kind of internal corrosion. We're given areas there for the bacteria to start to leach onto, start attract itself to then start obviously causing problems, with bacterial growth within the system. On the other hand, if we take a look at the right-hand side, we can see there what looks to be a newer install. So from there, we can see the pipes are sort of spaced apart a little bit more. Obviously, we can see there's some lagging on there. It's quite a substantial size lagging. So we're going to remove the issues there. We'll remove the potential problems for them being sort of transitional heat loss and gains, straighter runs and whatever. So that, we're trying to keep that pipe as best we can, protect it from any kind of heat gains to eradicate that bacterial growth, which can come around within these sort of water systems themselves. They're different building types. Obviously, we look at the way buildings are nowadays. There are varying types of buildings, and they're different in the way they're designed, the way they function, their intended use. So, we see now a lot of glass buildings. That the building there on the top left-hand side, that's Snow Hill 2 in Birmingham. Obviously, that is a large size, fully glass building. Essentially, it's like a large greenhouse. So obviously, that has to be taken into account with the water systems when it comes to its design, because we have to look at the way the building is heated, the way the building is cooled, the impact on having so much glass. But also the intended use of the building. I know that building itself is a multiple occupancy building. Within there are different types of the way that the building works, the way it's used. There are different types of offices within there. Some are internal, some are external. So we have to take into account how that looks when we go from the way the building's designed. The one in the centre, so we look at their sort of distribution centre again. So there's probably very minimal office space, but there will be, obviously, the warehouse will have various water systems running around them. They tend to work in larger systems. The water tends to run across sort of in the roof voids or the roof spaces, and that again can have an impact. Heat rises, so we know we're getting the heat is trapped up there. Again, there's long runs of pipe across there as well that may go around the system, so I have to think about that when we're looking at draw-off times. Old traditional brick buildings, again, work in different ways. It's probably an older building, it's probably got older design pipe work in there, older design layouts. And the way the building heats and cools itself is going to have an impact on the system as well. You'll probably find there's big cast iron radiators in there, which will have a different heat load on the building as well. And again, hospitals, that's the QE Hospital in Birmingham. Again, the water systems within that building are huge, they're vast. The pump stations or the plant rooms are on the roof here. There's one in each one of those void spaces. But that obviously is a newer design building. You can see that everything's been taken into account. But on the left-hand side of that picture, that is also the older part of the hospital. So we have the women's hospital here, where they have the birthing centres. And this would have been added to or had parts removed from it over years, creating all sorts of different problems to the water systems. Along with the older side, this is the cancer unit here as well. It's newer, but there's still sort of areas there that are going to need to be taken care of. So every single building is different. Every single building works in a different way, and those different ways can have different impacts on the way that the water systems behave, whether it be heating or cooling or hot or cold water supplies. There is differences in there the way that it works. So poor insulation, it can have a massive impact on the water quality. So poor installations are a major contributing factor when it comes to bacterial growth within water systems. And consideration should always be taken when either installing from new or carrying out remedial works to existing systems. So we've got a couple of examples here of where we are putting potential risk into the water systems. We can see here we have some capped off areas, so whether it be under a basin, which looks like this was taken from, or a run of pipe here. They're just capped off, so there's going to be no water flow. This pipe at the top may very well have water flowing through it, but what we're not going to have is this dead leg's going to have to turn over its water. So there's any kind of bacterial growth which starts to form within there, it's going to start creating problems around the water system. So wherever we can, it's always important that we remove the dead leg from the system. Okay, you might have to rejig the pipe work slightly, but it's still very important that we remove that issue with the dead leg. Again, the one in the centre, that could be easily resolved by changing this T-piece here for an elbow maybe. But again, we're creating more risk by leaving this dead leg here. The bacterial growth can sit there if there's ambient or transitional heat that goes through there. That water can start to warm up. You get the bacterial growth. There's no turnover. There's stagnant water. It's going to be an absolute breeding ground there for the bacterial growth. The one on the far right side looks like a good install. It's nice, new, shiny copper. But what it does sort of show there is that there is pipe work that is running close to each other. There is no lagging on there. I'm not going to say it wasn't lagged after the picture was taken, but obviously if you've got hot and cold water services running close to each other there, we're going to start to gain heat losses or get heat gain and heat loss across the pipe work again. So it's always important to try and keep the pipes well spaced apart, but also add the insulation, the lagging onto there to make sure we get rid of or eradicate that risk of heat coming across there. So the bacterial growth itself within water systems, we'll have a quick look at this. Now, please bear in mind we are a valve manufacturer. I'm not a huge expert in bacterial growth, but I'd like to think I've learned enough over the years to understand the bacterial growth within the water systems. But bacterial growth, it's a breeding ground for bacteria, these water systems. So bacterial growth can be found in both hot and cold water systems, and two of the main contributing factors being water temperature and water movement. Now, for the bacteria to grow within the system, there has to be the right environment for both survival and multiplication, and this is known as what we call the causative chain. So it's a sequence of events, or it's each key element of a chain of events which create or lead us to the point of infection and the point of disease. And when we talk about the breeding grounds, we're talking about Legionella and similar things that have the bacterial growth within the water systems. So the habitat, so water systems, the pipework, the storage tanks, the outlet and dead leg, all these are habitats where the bacteria can start to grow. Now, water systems, there are two main ones. So there's obviously the natural water systems, or there are man-made water systems. We're obviously focusing here on man-made systems because we're talking about pipework and stored water. But obviously there is also a risk for sort of low-lying stagnant water as well, which you may see out in the in nature itself. There's going to be bacterial growth in there as well. But storage tanks, outlets, dead legs, if they're not maintained and looked after properly, they become a habitat and a breeding ground for this kind of bacteria. So moving on from the habitat, it's the multiplication, and this is where it really starts to get dangerous, because this is where the spores start to multiply, or the bacteria start to multiply, and we start to obviously put a higher concentration into the system of bacterial growth. So the optimum temperatures, or the breeding temperatures for this for the bacteria, is between 20 and 45 degrees. 37 degrees being the optimum temperature, and that is roundly roughly what the core body temperature is as well. Now, the bacterial growth, certainly in Legionella, will lie dormant below 20 degrees, absolutely lie dormant, but it will still be there. So it's just because you've dropped the temperature, you're not going to kill off the bacterial growth, it will just remain dormant in the system. Nutrients in the water source, so if you've got sort of algae, slime, or any kind of other nutrient sources for the bacterial growth in the system, it's going to be an absolute breeding ground for the bacteria to start to grow. Now, the kill time will decrease with temperature increase, and what we mean by that is the hotter the water becomes above a certain temperature, we're going to start to kill off that bacterial growth, and that's something that we will focus and look on a little bit later in the presentation. But the hotter the water becomes, the quicker the kill time of that bacteria becomes. So moving on from the multiplication, aerosol generation. So this is now where it starts to become dangerous, this is where we start to be able to take this in as human beings. So we look at sort of the likes of cooling and condensing towers, humidifiers, taps and showers, and spas. Certainly spas are something that are far more available nowadays than what they used to be, with the likes of the inflatable spas that you can get nowadays. Now, these create their own issues. If you are not chemically treating the water, your spa is sitting quite nicely at a temperature of 37, 38, 39 degrees. If you've not got any kind of bacterial treatment within there, you are giving out perfect, perfect breeding ground, shall we say, for bacterial, along with the aerosol generation. You get the steam, you get the very small micro bubbles that come off there. That then starts to become aerosol generation. There was an instance of a jacuzzi shop not too far from where we're based here in Stafford, where they had a display unit that was just sitting there at the entrance to their showroom, ticking away at 40 degrees. There was no chemical treatment in there, because obviously in the eyes of the people running the showroom, there was going to be nobody using it. But what was happening is people were walking past and starting to inhale, the spores, or they were looking at it and standing close and starting to inhale it. People were starting to get ill. So it's very important that we treat this and understand the areas where we get the aerosol generation. Taps and showers, again, something that's very close to us all in our home environment. There's issues that can come around that as well if it's not maintained properly and the bacteria is taken care of. So moving on for the aerosol generation, we are starting to now look at the route to infection, and there's three routes to infection, should we say, if we start to sort of start to get ill from it. So we've got inhalation, we've got aspiration, we've got intubation. So inhalation is where we breathe in the spores. Now, there's a misconception that you could drink a glass of water that contains bacterial growth and it can make you ill. That is not the case. But the infected spores, so when we sort of look at steam generation, or very, very small microbubbles which enter the system, if we start to inhale those, it starts to attack our respiratory system. Now, remember, the likes of Legionella are respiratory infections, very similar to what we see with COVID at the moment. It attacks the lungs, it attacks the breathing system. So that's what we look at when we look at inhalation. Now, aspiration, slightly different. So when we sometimes swallow or swallow a drink and we cough and we say, oh, it's gone down the wrong hole, that is just a different way that your airways are opening up, and that's a way that we can get infected spores into the body as well. So that's what we look at. We look at aspiration, and the third one there is intubation, and that involves putting a foreign object into the body, into the breathing airways that has got contaminated spores or contaminated particles on there. I know from a contact of mine that there's been instances where there's been, say, for instance, an RTA, so a car crash, and the ambulance service have been treating a patient. The water that's coming from the fire service has contained bacterial growth, and obviously the patient was treated for their airways with some equipment which has got some of the water on there, and there's risk of infection, and that has actually happened. So those are the three ways: so the route to infection, inhalation, aspiration, and intubation. And the final one is susceptible groups of people. So we're looking at a ratio of males of 3 to 1. Smokers, obviously, smokers having sort of damaging the airways or the breathing systems themselves anyway. We're starting to increase that risk level. Alcoholics, again, it's part of the body where we're attacking the parts of the body that we need to survive. We're attacking that with alcohol. Immunosuppressants, so people who are immunosuppressant, if you take tablets or you've got a condition which means you are immunosuppressant, you're obviously more susceptible because you don't have the the grounds to fight that. And sort of the older generation, so age sort of 45 plus, getting older, again are classed as a susceptible group of people. Again, we refer back to it, and we can see in the relatives times where we are now, a lot of the symptoms and a lot of the groups of people which are susceptible to bacterial infection from water, so Legionella, are also the same group of people which are susceptible to catching COVID. Again, they're very similar because they are respiratory infections. They affect the way that your breathing system works. So that's kind of a way that we have to look at the moment, and it is very similar in the way that they behave. So breeding grounds bacteria in the water system. So Legionella can live and grow in the biofilm. So look at the cross section there. We've got the water. So you've got your free floating bacteria, you've got your pipe wall, but there you've got your biofilm associated with bacteria, and you've got your secreted slime or sediment which sits in the bottom of the pipe. So if you're not keeping your water turnover, you've not got a good shearing force of water which is pulling through the system, the sediment which starts to set in the pipe can become a breeding ground for this bacteria, which is why it's important that if people are putting flushing regimes in place, you make sure you turn over a high volume of water, or you've got a good flow of water going through the systems, as well as carrying out your temperature flushing as well, to make sure that the pipe work is kept free and clean from any kind of debris inside, etc. A good environment for growth. So oxygen, so you've got oxygenated water, slow moving water, it likes to be able to sort of meander around in water where it's not moving. Wet tubing, what we mean by wet tubing is as pipe gets older, some of the old lead pipes certainly, and steel pipes, they start to actually absorb the water that they contain within them. And that can start to obviously be a breeding ground because the bacteria can start to latch onto that and start to form a ground to breed in. Warm ambient temperatures, again, we speak a lot about the bacterial growth and the areas where the where the bacteria start to grow. If we've got cold, say for instance cold mains which are running very high ambient temperatures, obviously we can start to creep that water up, especially if it's not turning over very quickly. It soon heats up, and we can sort of have pipes sitting with temperatures plus 20 degrees, and that's going to start to cause problems because that's when the bacteria will start to grow and start to multiply. But also organic matter, you can see there that pipe has started to corrode. It's started to take an organic matter. There's all sorts of bacterial growth that's going to take part within that pipe. So it's very important that we make sure that the systems that they sit within are kept clean, free of debris, free of any sort of secreted slime or sediment which sits in there, and good flushing regimes or risk assessments can identify the areas that need to be done and what sort of measures you need to put in place when it comes to making sure the water systems are kept as clean as they can be. So good environments for growth, sediment, biofilms, slow, low turnover of water, warm ambient temperatures, and organic matter. Now, these are some examples here of what we're looking at. So this is a cold water storage tank. You can see that the condition of that water is not great at all. And the fact that water hasn't been turned over for a vast amount of time, as you can tell by the state of it, that tank probably is no longer required because it's just not been used. It's not getting the turnover of water. But a risk assessment carried out by a competent person would be able to identify this as a risk within the system and point out that tank should probably be removed, or sort of the way it's used certainly be reviewed. Again, we can see another tank here where we can start to see the bacterial growth. So those black spots which are sitting around the edge of the tank itself is where we started to see the bacterial growth in the tank itself. Again, very important that the tanks are cleaned and well maintained, looked at to remove that, remove that bacterial growth. I put on one there, a difficult one to turn over. That's actually taken from the emergency shower. Quite difficult to turn that water over because they should only ever really be used in an emergency. I have unfortunately had to use one of those, and I was working on a site where there was an acid leak. And I'm certainly sure that if I thought the water was like that in the top of the tank, no matter how bad my burns were, I'm not too sure I would have wanted to jump in that. So if people are carrying out risk assessments or if people are looking after buildings, it's vitally important that we identify all the areas of stored water so the correct regimes can be put in place for cleaning, flushing, and maintaining those storage systems essentially. And again, we talk about high ambient temperatures. This is a very old, what I would call traditional plant room. When I first started back on the tools many years ago, this is the sort of environments we used to walk into. There's no lagging. There's probably 6 or 7 huge kilowatt, high kilowatt boilers in there chucking out heat. And the cold water is soon going to increase in temperature, and we're going to start to enter some really dangerous rooms for bacteria. And of course, there's a lot of the way that pipe work has been reduced as well. You're going to get sort of low flow areas of pipe work, etc. So it's very important we take into account all of these things when we're looking at, trying to prevent the environments for growth for bacteria. So a bit of legislation and guidance. The legislative and guidance documents include the Health and Safety Executive, the approved code of practice for L8. That's Legionella disease, the control of Legionella bacteria in water systems. The Health and Safety Guide, so HSG 274 parts 1, 2 and 3. That's the Legionella disease technical guidance. NHS Estates, so that's the Health Technical Memorandum, and we will HGMO 0401, and that's the control of Legionella in healthcare premises, and it's a code of practice. The control of substances or hazardous to health, or COSH. A lot of people refer to COSH as a sort of chemical environment, but obviously, we're talking about substances that are or deemed to be hazardous to our health. And the Chartered Institute of Building Service Engineers, so their technical memorandum TME13, so CIBSE, and that's minimising the risk of Legionella disease. And also the British Association for Chemical Specialists Code of Practice, that's the control of Legionella by the safe and effective operation of cooling systems. So this is some of the legislation and guidance that sits around the control of Legionella and bacterial growth. A lot of it is guidance and best practice. I think the important thing to remember when we talk about the control of Legionella in water systems is that it's not always necessarily referring to trying to eradicate or completely remove the bacteria from the system. It's about managing the risk as best we can to prevent any harm to health. So that's what the sort of takes. It's all guidance, it's legislation, it's just points everybody in the right direction to be able to make sure that the systems are looked after and maintained in the right way. So that's what we look at when we look at legislation and guidance. It's a health and safety document there. There's HTMO 0401 as well, and just different bits of guidance that we need. They're all readily available. I think if you can get them on the internet, you might have to pay a small fee, but those documents are available for people to read and get hold of. And thermal disinfection. So elevating temperatures to kill off growth. So there's two different ways we can look at sort of dealing with bacterial growth within the system. There is the chemical way, so by putting sort of different forms of chemicals into systems to try and kill off the bacterial growth, or what we're going to look at here as a valve manufacturer is elevated temperatures. So one of the control measures for Legionella bacteria in water is temperature control, and this means ensuring the water temperatures are outside the range identified for the purification of the Legionella bacteria. And if the hot water is stored, should be stored above 60 degrees, and similarly the cold water should be stored below 20 degrees. So, I mean, one of the very simple things to remember, when it comes to Legionella control is keeping the cold water cold and keep it turning over, keep it moving, and keeping the hot water hot or as hot as you can and keep it turning over. Like I say, the bacteria doesn't like it when there's fast flowing, high flowing volume of water. It likes to find dead legs, it likes to flow sort of stagnant water. So we want to keep it moving. But if we look at a bit of a time or a temperature scale here, so anything sub 20 degrees, the bacteria will survive in a dormant state. And then we start to move up there. So between 20 and 45 degrees is the optimum growth temperature where the bacteria will start to multiply. 50 degrees, so we're looking at a 2-hour kill time or 90% kill in 2 hours. So we're going to kill 90% of the bacteria within 2 hours. If we raise that to 60 degrees, so we're looking at sort of 90% kill in 2 minutes. So it's very much a time versus temperature scenario. If we move all that to 70 degrees, we're starting to look at instant kill times then. So if we raise the water temperature to 70 degrees plus, we look at an instant kill time in the bacteria. It struggles to survive in temperatures above 70 degrees. So that's kind of where we look at when it comes to the time versus temperature kill off of bacterial growth. So we'll look at a bit of thermal disinfection now and thermostatic mixing valves or TMVs. Obviously, we are a manufacturer of TMVs, so we see different sides of the market. But since Scalding is a real danger, especially in healthcare settings, particularly where vulnerable patients and residents are concerned, thermostatic mixing valves or TMVs should be fitted, and these will ensure that water temperature is high enough to kill Legionella bacteria, but low enough to reduce or eradicate any risk of scalding from very hot water or burning from hot surfaces. So we're looking at different schemes. You may very well have heard TMV2, TMV3. TMV2 is very much a domestic-based approval, so looking at sort of homeowners, etc. Whereas TMV3 is based on DOA, it's based on the healthcare scheme for the NHS. So function, so TMVs accurately control water temperatures for bathing, showering, hand washing and bidets, and they are designed to maintain the desired water temperature even when incoming water pressures fluctuate or flow rates change. Now the fail-safe function of the valve is arguably the most important feature. This will stop extremes of hot or cold water entering the faucet. The common misconception is that TMVs will completely isolate, whereas with flow, whereas it's not requirement, it's not always placed at the standard. So if anybody does work in the healthcare when they're looking at sort of mixing valves and they're carrying out maintenance on these valves, look at the fail-safe feature. We're looking at a rise in mixed water temperature from the actual initial setting. So if we are taking, say for instance, a temperature of 40 degrees, if that water was to increase by just 2 degrees, so from 42 degrees, the standard states, or the British standard states, that can have a duration or a runtime for 10 plus seconds because it's not deeming that 42 degrees to be a dangerous temperature. Now, if we go the other side, if we go up to 50 degrees from the 40 degrees, obviously we're now looking at dangerous temperatures for scalding. That all of a sudden, that runtime comes down to 0.25 seconds. So we are almost looking for an instant shut off there. So what we mean by this is as the temperature increases, we're looking for a decrease in runtime. So it's time versus temperature when it comes to the fail-safe. There is a part further on in the legislation guidance that sits around this in the standard that does state that obviously, sometimes people say, well, I've got a shower that's dribbling X amount, but that collective water can, I think, equate to about 120 millilitres at a set temperature, but that's obviously from a very small dribble. Now, we're talking about a risk to health here, and a lot of it is based on full immersion, so it's based on bath water. Because full immersion is where a lot of the actual issues come from, or a lot of the harm is to people's health. So thermostatic mixing valves mixes the hot and cold water at an inlet, so they maintain the mixed water at a constant set temperature at the outlet. So if we've got constant hot water circling around at 65 degrees, because that's what we store it at, that is too hot for someone to come and just run their hand under or have an issue with, with taking that much hot water. So we would fit what we call a point of use mixing valve. So we can see here we've got one on the basin, and we've got one on a bath as well. So we're bringing those hot temperatures, those elevated temperatures, we're bringing those lower down. So using thermostatic mixing valves, we have a cold supply of 20 degrees coming in, we have a hot supply of 65 degrees coming in, and then we have a mixed temperature, say for instance 40 degrees is the mixed temperatures that we've set on this valve. So that's what the mixing valve does, that's what we're looking at when it comes to bringing those temperatures down. Break down the valves, so you've got the head work, you've got some check valves so we're not getting any back pressure, we're not contaminating the supplies. You've got the regulation armature within there, so that's what regulates the temperature. And we've got the flow conveyor, which allows the water to flow through. And we've got the thermostatic sensor which expands and contracts, moving the other components to make sure that we get a standard and nice flow of water, and we are not, we're not risking any health to people. There's nothing electronic there. There's nothing massively complicated. It is the fact of 2 springs and a thermostatic element which moves up and down to close and open the different hot and cold armatures to make sure we get a blended mixed temperature. So again, elevate temperatures. So we look, this is a standard mixing valve now. So cold 20 degrees, hot at 65 degrees. We've then got an outlet to the tap of 40 degrees. Now, what we get here is the mixture, or the mixed outlet going through to the tap, sorry, shall we say. And we've got now 40 degrees water, which is sitting in the bottom part of the mixing valve, in the pipe work, and also in the faucet of the tap when it's closed off. Now, if we look back, remember back to where we were talking to about the temperatures. 40 degrees is prime temperatures, or prime growth temperature for the bacteria to grow. And every time a mixing valve is turned off, if that's not used for any prolonged period of time, we've created almost a dead leg, and we've created an area of stagnated water at a temperature where the bacteria is happy to start growing. So the solution, or what we look at to do that, so thermostatic diverting valve with a thermal disinfection. This is something that's quite new to the market. It's the only valve on the market as a direct point of use mixing valve at the moment. And then the unique manual override function allows thermal disinfection against Legionella to perform using a special tool. So this is valve in a T pattern, or what we call a H pattern, or MX. But we have a tool here. Now what this does, the tool lifts the spindle, then by bypassing the operation of the thermostatic cartridge and the higher temperatures, hot water passes through the valve and the pipe work to thermally disinfect all the way through to the outlet. So where before we've potentially had a dead leg from the valve all the way through to the outlet, we can overcome that now. So you remove the cap, and we carry out this thermal override function. So look at the internals of the valve again. We've got the head works. So how does the thermal disinfection work? So we've got the cold water coming in, and we've got the hot water coming in, and then we've got our mixed temperature there, 40 degrees again. Now we spoke about 40 degrees being a dangerous temperature, mixed outlet temperature. So with the new valve, we have the thermal override function. So that key then lifts what we call the headwork within the valve itself. And then we've got, so we're raising the headwork with inside there, lifts the thermostatic element, thus allowing the hot water to fully disengage all the way through the mixing valve. So where we looked on the left-hand side, we've still got 40 degrees. When we've actually disengaged that, disengaged that cartridge, without managing to pull raw hot water through, so whether that be 65 or 70 degrees, maybe we're putting it all the way through the pipe work. We're taking the bacterial growth out of that mixed pipe work. We're killing it off at high temperatures all the way through to the outlet. So we're making sure that we're removing that bacterial growth by thermal disinfection all the way to the outlet, and not leaving a potential dangerous dead leg within the sort of areas itself. So again, like I say, it's pulling 65 degrees through the sensor, and then 65 degrees out of the tap itself. So we're trying to kill off that bacterial growth as best we can by elevating the temperatures all the way through to the outlet, through the mixing part of the valve, through the pipe work, and then on through to the tap as well. It does have a warning sticker on there, so when any works are being carried out, you put that on there to let people know that the valve has been worked on. And it cannot be left in the override function, because you have to engage and disengage the key manually. So there is a safety feature in there as well when it comes to that. So just to finish off, a bit of a conclusion. So water systems in buildings are living organisms. Pipe work layouts and maintenance of storage are key factors in managing the risk of bacterial growth. Different building designs and construction could impact on water quality. When using thermal disinfection as means for bacterial control, ensure the elevated temperatures are pulled through to the outlet. And remember, a very simple way to remember this is keep cold water cold and keep it moving, and keep the hot water hot and keep it moving. Now, we want to be able to remove all those areas of risk when it comes to bacterial growth. And that is me done. Sean, I'm not sure there's any questions that have come through, mate.
Yeah, so we've just got a couple from Mark, first of which being, what's the difference between a tempering valve and a TMV?
Okay, so a tempering valve is used at heat source. So you'd use a tempering valve if you're storing, say, for instance, water at 80 degrees in a hot water cylinder, and you want to then circulate that at 60 or 65 degrees. That valve is what we call a tempering valve. So you're controlling the water at source of the heat source. You'd circulate it around at 65 or 60 degrees, and you then reduce down again at your outlet. So it's just different application. They still have a fail-safe function. They still work in a similar way. They're just designed and manufactured to slightly different standards.
Brilliant. And the next one that's coming is low flow and return temperatures are discussed in the latest software journal. Temperature is one control, chemical is another. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So repeat the question again. Sorry, you broke up a little bit.
Low flow and return temperatures are discussed in the latest software journal. I think it's software journal. SOFA. Temperature is one control, chemical is another. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I think there's probably certain people, I know there's one person or one contact in this call who work in different ways. You know, we've always spoken, you know, as a valve manufacturer, we talk about elevated temperature because that's what our valves do. There are other people who champion using chemicals to do the disinfection because they feel they can get, you know, more control over it. Obviously, using chemicals within mechanical valves has an impact on the internal components of the valves. You know, if it's not done correctly, you can sort of cause corrosion or deterioration of some of the internal components. I personally, you know, I sit in a world where we use valves and thermal disinfection for it. Do I have anything against using chemicals? Absolutely not. There are ways and means in each way, you know, to be able to overcome the bacterial growth or the treatment of water system. So, you know I've certainly spoken to both sets of people, you know, in the chemical world and the thermal disinfection world. They've both got pros and cons, you know, so I don't, you know, I have to remain impartial on that one.
One final one then, mate. Where can they find some data sheets on the Mixcal Careflow Plus?
Okay, so all the information on those valves are on our website. So www.altecnic.co.uk. If you head over there, there's information on there with data sheets, etc. There's also, we do have a YouTube page, and there's some sort of there's an instructional video on there, like an animation showing how the valve works. But there's also one done by my colleague Steph, who talks through how the valve functions as well. So just head over to the website and you can find all the information over there.
Lovely stuff. That's everything. Thanks, mate.
Okay, well, listen, thank you everybody for your time. If anybody does want any more information on our products, please just head over to our website and keep your eyes peeled for future webinars. Thank you all very much for your time and watching.